Hi there, I'm Kelly and I'm standing in front of the unendowed section at Greenwood Cemetery. And I'm going to be reading a passage out of the Haunted Spokane, Ghosts and Dark Places in the Lilac City by Chet Kaskey. And this is about a young woman named Christine Dolman. So directly in front of the visitor center, as one enters Greenwood Cemetery's main gate, is a flat grassy area extended all of the way back to the wooded hilly area rising up to the west. Some of the graves are marked with flat-lying grass markers in this area, and some of them are not marked at all. To the south of this grassy area, or left rear behind the cemetery office, is a 10-acre area of the cemetery called the Unendowed Graves. Graves in this forested and overgrown section of the cemetery are old and mostly untended. Indigent people whose few dollars at the time of death were insufficient to purchase a grave are buried here, as are the occasional hanged criminals. Spokane's notorious poisoner, John Craven, from 1875 to 1924 was his age, is buried here in an unmarked grave. Also, the family and friends of deceased loved ones who could afford a grave, but just barely and without a proper headstone, are buried in this section of the cemetery. Poor Christine Dolman is buried in this wooded, unendowed section of the cemetery, but her ghost may not rest easy there. Some would say 27-year-old Christine's outstanding feature was a great personality, but 62-year-old Charles Brooks, 35 years Christine's senior, thought her complexion was as pure as Lake Coeur d'Alene, and her hair flowed as beautifully as the waterfalls of the Spokane River. In fact, Charles lusted after Christine, and not in a healthy way. Pawning most of his possessions, Charles bought a new suit of clothes and, befriending the young woman, took Christine on lavish dinner dates he could ill afford in downtown Spokane. Just when his money had about run out, Charles succeeded in convincing Christine to marry him. Charles and Christine were united hastily in matrimony before a justice of the peace because of the urgency of his love, according to Charles, but in reality because Charles could no longer afford a proper wedding and honeymoon. Imagine Christine's surprise when Charles took her home from the ceremony to his miserable room over a saloon and billiard parlor at the Balkan Hotel at 35 West Main Street. Christine was greatly offended and justly thought she had been the victim of fraud. She left in a huff, consulted an attorney, and promptly sued for an annulment. However, Charles was possessed by an evil animus. He followed Christine everywhere, demanding in a loud voice on the streets of Spokane that she belonged to him and she should return home to her husband. Christine complained bitterly to the police, but still Charles stalked her. Friends of Christine gave Charles a stern talking to, but still Charles stalked her. Then, on the night of July 5th, 1891, Charles confronted Christine on the Havermale Island in downtown Spokane and demanded one last time that she come home with him. Of course, Christine refused. Having been rejected for the final time, Charles withdrew a revolver from his pocket and shot his beloved Christine to death with multiple blasts from the gun. Having paid her last dollar to the attorney for an annulment, Christine was not well off. To give Christine a decent burial, her women friends from work took up a collection to bury her body at Greenwood Cemetery in the inexpensive common burial ground in the unendowed graves area. There was not even enough money left over for a headstone to memorialize her young life with. As for the psychopath Charles, he was hanged by the neck until dead, and rightfully so, on the lawn of the Spokane County Courthouse. There were no mourners around to pay for his sordid grave, and so the county paid $250 for his interment at Greenwood Cemetery out of its indigent burial account. The saying goes, rest in peace, but for some there is no peace even in that eternal resting place. Imagine poor Christine's ghostly surprise when, in selecting a plot of ground to bury the body of Charles in, the grave diggers at Greenwood laid the stalking and murdering Charles to rest in a grave close to Christine's. When I am asked about sightings of a ghostly feminine form in the unendowed area of the first terrace at Greenwood Cemetery, apparently walking towards the main gate and out of the cemetery, I say without hesitation or further identification, "Oh, that's Christine." Whose other wandering ghost looking for some final peace outside of Greenwood Cemetery could it possibly be? End of Christine Dolman's story.